Have you ever stood at the edge of history and felt the brush of something greater than yourself? Picture this: the year 1588, and the Spanish Armada, the most formidable naval force of its time, sails toward England with one mission: conquest. But then something impossible happens, a storm so violent, so sudden, it defies all explanation, tears through the fleet, scattering ships like toys. Queen Elizabeth herself would call it the Protestant wind, a divine hand tipping the scales in favor of her kingdom. Was it luck or something far more mysterious? Stories like this ripple through time, across every culture and creed, whispering of moments when the ordinary rules of reality seem to bend when the inexplicable steps in and changes everything. This is the world of divine intervention, where the boundaries between the earthly and the eternal blur in ways that leave even skeptics breathless. From ancient battles swayed by unseen forces to modern miracles defying medical science, these accounts share a haunting question: what if we're not alone in shaping our fate? Whether you call it the hand of God, the will of the universe, or simply a mystery beyond our grasp, these stories tap into something deep within us, a yearning to believe that when all seems lost, something greater might intervene. And that's exactly what we're exploring today: 25 of the most astonishing, spine-tingling moments in history where divine intervention didn't just whisper, it roared. We'll journey through sacred texts and soldiers' diaries, through hospital wards and hurricane winds, uncovering events so extraordinary they've sparked debates for centuries. Some will make you wonder, others might make you believe, but every single one will leave you with a chilling thought. What if the unexplainable isn't just a legend? What if it's woven into the very fabric of our world? So lean in closer, because history is about to get a lot less predictable. In the quiet Portuguese village of Fatima in the year 1917, three young shepherds, Lucia, Francisco, and Jacinta, claimed to encounter a woman, brighter than the sun, hovering above a tree. She shared visions of peace amid the chaos of World War I, urging prayer and repentance. But it was on October 13th of that year that history itself seemed to pause. Tens of thousands gathered in the rain-soaked fields, skeptics and believers alike, drawn by rumors of a promised miracle. Then, as the children fell to their knees, the clouds tore open. Witnesses described the sun trembling in the sky, spinning like a wheel of fire, casting kaleidoscopic colors across the land before plunging toward the earth in a heart-stopping dive, only to stop just short. Some cried out in terror, others dropped to their knees in prayer. Even secular newspapers reported the impossible. Watchers stopped at the exact moment the sun danced, and soaked clothes dried instantly under its heatless glow. Scientists scrambled for explanations: mass hallucination, a rare atmospheric phenomenon. Yet how could 70,000 people share the same hallucination? The Catholic Church, initially wary, spent years investigating before declaring it worthy of belief. But perhaps the most haunting detail lies in the children's own words. The woman had foretold the event months in advance, down to the very hour. Coincidence or something far beyond our understanding? The trenches of World War I were a living nightmare: mud, blood, and the relentless thunder of artillery. But in August 1914, during the Battle of Mons, something flickered through the darkness that no military strategist could have predicted. As British troops, outnumbered and exhausted, fought desperately against the advancing German forces, an eerie hush fell over the battlefield. Then came the stories soldiers swore they saw them. Spectral bowmen materializing from the mist, their arrows cutting down enemy troops with unearthly precision. Others described towering, luminous figures standing between them and certain death, their swords gleaming like lightning. One private wrote home of an angel wrapping its wings around his unit just as a shell exploded harmlessly overhead. The reports spread like wildfire, giving rise to the legend of the Angel of Mons. Even hardened veterans, men who'd scoffed at ghost stories, spoke in trembling voices of the supernatural rescue. Newspapers seized on the tale, some calling it divine retribution for German aggression, while psychologists dismissed it as mass hysteria, a desperate mind's trick under unimaginable stress. But here's the chilling detail. Multiple accounts from different regiments describe the same vision down to the last detail, despite having no way to communicate with each other in the chaos of retreat. Historians still debate it. Some point to a popular short story about ghostly archers published just before the battle, suggesting it planted the idea in soldiers' minds. Others note that not a single German record mentions encountering anything unusual that day, but for the men who lived through it, no explanation could shake their certainty. One officer later confessed he'd been an atheist until that night in the trenches. Whether trick of the light or heavenly host, the Angel of Mons became something more than a myth. It was a lifeline, a whisper of hope when all seemed lost, and that perhaps is the real mystery, not just what happened that night, but why, against all odds, so many clung to the story as fiercely as they clung to life itself. Constantinople in the year 626 was a city trembling on the brink. The Avars and their Persian allies had surrounded the walls, cutting off supply lines, while their siege towers loomed like skeletal fingers against the sky. Inside, the Byzantines, outnumbered, starving, clung to one desperate hope, a centuries-old icon of the Virgin Mary, paraded along the battlements as enemies prepared their final assault. Then, as chroniclers would later swear, the impossible happened. Storm clouds gathered without warning. The sea, moments before calm, erupted into waves that crushed the Avar fleet against their own siege engines. Survivors among the attackers would tell of seeing a woman in blue standing atop the city's gates, her cloak cast like a shield over Constantinople. The Byzantines knew exactly who they believed saved them. For days, priests had led processions chanting the Akita hymn, a soaring tribute to the Virgin's protection. Its verses, promising divine intervention for the faithful, seemed to manifest before their eyes. When the Avars mysteriously abandoned camp the next morning, leaving behind smoldering siege equipment, Emperor Heraclius declared it not a military victory but a miracle. Byzantine historians meticulously recorded the event. How arrows rained down yet failed to strike defenders, how Persian commanders suddenly ordered retreats for no tactical reason. Even the Avars' own shamans reportedly warned their leaders of an invisible army guarding the city. Skeptics point to clever Byzantine diplomacy, rumors of gold bribes to Avar chieftains, or perhaps a sudden outbreak of disease in the enemy camp. But the timing defies easy explanation. The siege lifted on the very night the Akita hymn reached its climactic verse. To you, our leader in battle and defender, we offer songs of victory. For centuries after, the event was commemorated as the Feast of the Praise of the Theotokos, a celebration of divine guardianship so deeply woven into Byzantine identity that even Ottoman conquerors would later preserve the icon that supposedly turned the tide. Was it mass fervor sharpening morale at a critical hour, or something beyond strategy? The walls of Constantinople still whisper the answer believers have clung to for 1400 years. Sometimes history hinges not on swords but on the unseen hand guiding them. Modern archaeology adds another layer to the mystery. Excavations near the ancient seawalls reveal Avar siege engines buried in marine sediment, exactly where Byzantine texts describe the sudden storm sinking them. And the Akita hymn, it's still sung in Orthodox churches today, its melody carrying the weight of a city's deliverance. Perhaps that's the true power of such stories. They outlast empires, turning moments of desperation into timeless reminders that courage and faith can collide in ways no chronicler fully explains. The desert can play tricks on the mind, heat waves shimmering like water, rocks twisting into shadowy figures, but what Moses witnessed near Mount Sinai was no illusion. A bush blazed before him, flames licking at its branches yet leaving them untouched, green and supple as if basking in morning dew. Then came the voice, not from the fire but through it, declaring sacred ground beneath his sandals. This moment, recounted in Exodus, would alter the course of history, birthing the 10 Commandments and the liberation of an entire people. Scholars still wrestle with the mysteries of that encounter. Some theologians argue the burning bush symbolizes God's presence consuming yet never destroying, a paradox of divine power and mercy. Others see it as a call to radical attention. How often do we walk past the extraordinary, mistaking it for the ordinary? The location itself stokes debate. For centuries, monks and archaeologists have scoured the Sinai Peninsula searching for the exact site. One theory points to Jabal Makla in Saudi Arabia, where blackened shrubs grow near a split rock, uncanny echoes of biblical descriptions. Yet the mountain's true identity may matter less than what it represents. The thin places where heaven and earth brush against each other. The bush's endurance as a symbol is equally striking. It appears in medieval art with golden tendrils of fire, in abolitionist pamphlets as an emblem of freedom, even in modern physics lectures where scientists ponder whether Moses witnessed an atmospheric plasma phenomenon. But here's what defies explanation: why this story, among countless ancient miracles, still sears itself into the collective imagination. Perhaps because it's not just about spectacle, it's about invitation. A shepherd, flawed and fearful, is chosen to confront a pharaoh. The divine voice doesn't promise ease, only purpose. I will be with you. Consider the layers beneath the flame. Jewish midrash suggests the bush was a thorny acacia, the humblest of desert plants, to show God dwells not only in grandeur but in the grit of struggle. Early Christian mystics saw it as a foreshadowing of Christ's fire of divinity cloaked in human frailty. And for the enslaved Africans of the American South, spirituals like Go Down Moses transformed the story into a coded anthem of deliverance. The bush burns beyond religion, becoming a universal metaphor, that moment when the mundane catches fire with meaning and you know deep in your bones you're standing on holy ground. Does science offer alternatives? Botanists note certain desert plants like dictamnus release volatile oils that can ignite briefly in extreme heat without harming the plant. Could natural phenomena have converged at that precise moment, kindling a vision that shaped civilizations? Maybe, but as one Bedouin guide remarked while pointing to a flickering shrub at dusk, the miracle isn't that it burns. The miracle is that someone stopped to listen. The streets of Constantinople in the year 541 were thick with the stench of death. The plague came without warning, first rats staggering from sewers, then feverish bodies collapsing in market squares, their skin blackened with grotesque swellings. By the time Emperor Justinian himself fell ill, half the city lay buried in mass graves. Yet amid the despair, whispers spread of something stranger than disease. Sailors docking at the Golden Horn swore they'd seen spectral horsemen galloping across the waves, their faces hidden by golden helmets. A nun in the Blasphemy district claimed the Virgin Mary appeared above the city walls holding a vial of healing oil. Most chilling of all were the reports from gravediggers, shadowy figures with scrolls pacing the cemeteries, crossing off names with invisible ink. Byzantine historians like Procopius documented these omens with eerie precision. He wrote of a ghostly ship drifting into harbor, its hold packed not with grain but with corpses, vanishing when guards rode out to inspect it. In churches across the empire, priests processed with relics, the bones of saints, fragments of the true cross, as desperate crowds clutched at them like lifelines. One account tells of a dying child in Antioch whose fever broke the instant a priest pressed a relic of Saint Simon to his lips. Skeptics might dismiss these as fever dreams or mass hysteria, but the timing defies coincidence. The plague's worst outbreaks coincided with reported visions, as if the veil between worlds grew thin under the weight of collective suffering. Modern science offers grim explanations for some phenomena. The Golden Horsemen could have been hallucinations induced by bubonic fever, while mass psychogenic illness might explain shared visions. Yet how do we account for the meticulous records of sudden recoveries after relic encounters? Researchers studying the placebo effect note that intense belief can trigger measurable immune responses. Could faith have literally healed some survivors? The relics themselves add another layer. Chemical analysis of Byzantine-era healing oils reveals some contained mild antibiotics from fermented herbs, suggesting ancient wisdom intertwined with spiritual practice. But the real mystery lies deeper. Justinian's plague reshaped history, killing perhaps 25 million and toppling empires. Yet Byzantine art from the era shows something extraordinary, angels not smiting sinners but holding scales, weighing souls with solemn mercy. This wasn't a theology of punishment but of mysterious purpose. A mosaic in Ravenna captures it best. Christ stands amid the devastation, not atop a throne but a rainbow, one hand raised not in judgment but in a gesture ancient Greeks used to signal storytelling. The message seems clear even in darkness. Something was narrating a larger tale. Today, as we face our own pandemics, the plague of Justinian asks us a haunting question. When all human efforts fail, what do we see in the shadows? And more importantly, what sees us? In the 8th century, in the small Italian town of Lanciano, a priest stood before his congregation, wrestling with a crisis of faith. As he raised the Eucharistic host during Mass, the bread and wine Catholics believed transform into the body and blood of Christ. Doubt gnawed at him. Did this ritual hold any real power, or was it merely symbolic? Then, without warning, the bread in his hands began to change. Witnesses gasped as it darkened, hardened, and took on the appearance of human flesh. The wine in the chalice thickened into 5 globules of blood, clumping together like coagulated droplets. The priest fell to his knees, overcome by what he could only describe as divine confirmation. This event, known as the Miracle of Lanciano, wasn't just a fleeting wonder. The transformed substances were carefully preserved, encased in a reliquary in the church of San Lanciano, where they remain visible even today, 12 centuries later. But here's where the story takes an even more astonishing turn. In the 1970s, a team of scientists, including renowned pathologist Dr. Edoardo Linoli, examined the relics under rigorous conditions. What they discovered defied logical explanation. The flesh was identified as cardiac tissue, specifically the left ventricle of a human heart, showing signs of distress consistent with severe trauma. It contained proteins, minerals, and white blood cells in perfect preservation, despite centuries without any chemical treatment. The blood, tested multiple times, revealed itself as genuine human blood type AB, a type found in only a small percentage of the global population, yet intriguingly common among other reported Eucharistic miracles. The findings sent shockwaves through both religious and scientific communities. Skeptics argued contamination or fraud, but Linoli's study, published in the Italian medical journal Quaderni di Clinica, stood firm. No preservatives had been used. The tissue showed no signs of decomposition, even after 1,200 years. Even more perplexing, the blood globules, when weighed individually or together, each had the exact same mass, a phenomenon physicists confirmed shouldn't occur naturally. For the Catholic Church, Lanciano became a cornerstone of Eucharistic devotion, a tangible affirmation of transubstantiation, the belief that the bread and wine truly become Christ's body and blood during Mass. Pilgrims still flocked to the tiny chapel, some kneeling in awe before the reliquary, others seeking healing. One modern priest, himself a former skeptic, described standing before the relics as like staring at a fingerprint of the divine, something too precise, too personal to dismiss as chance. But the mystery extends beyond faith. Secular historians note that Lanciano wasn't an isolated medieval marvel. Similar Eucharistic miracles dot church records from Buenos Aires to Sokolka, each with eerie parallels in their scientific analyses. Could there be a natural explanation? Some researchers point to rare cases of mycelium fungi altering organic matter, while others suggest mass psychogenic reactions. Yet none account for the consistency across centuries and continents. Perhaps the most haunting detail comes from an unlikely source, a Jewish hematologist who studied the Lanciano blood. He quietly confessed to colleagues that the sample's behavior, clotting yet remaining inexplicably fresh, matched ancient Hebrew descriptions of sacrificial blood in the Temple of Jerusalem, where offerings were believed to retain vitality if divinely accepted. A coincidence or a thread tying Lanciano not just to Catholic doctrine, but to a far older tradition of the sacred intersecting with the material. Standing in that quiet Italian church today, watching light filter through the reliquary glass, one thing becomes clear. Whether viewed as divine intervention or an unsolved scientific anomaly, the miracle of Lanciano forces a single, unshakable question. What if some mysteries aren't meant to be solved but witnessed? The sea off Japan's coast in 1274 was a churning nightmare of splintered wood and drowning men. Kublai Khan's Mongol armada, the largest invasion force the world had ever seen, had swept across the strait with terrifying efficiency until the sky turned black. Winds howled with such fury that sailors swore they heard voices in the gale, and waves taller than pagodas swallowed entire ships whole. By dawn, the mighty fleet lay in ruins, its survivors scattered on the tides. To the Japanese defenders watching from shore, there was no question. The kami, the sacred spirits of wind and sea, had intervened. 7 years later, when the Mongols returned with an even greater armada of 4,000 ships, the tempest struck again, more precise, more devastating. Storms lasted 2 days this time, drowning perhaps 80% of the invaders. The surviving samurai waded through wreckage to find corpses in strange armor tangled in the seaweed, their weapons still sheathed. No battle had been fought, no blades crossed, only the raging heavens, as if Japan itself were exhaling its divine breath to repel the threat. These twin typhoons birthed the legend of the kamikaze, the divine wind, a term that would echo through centuries. Ancient Shinto scrolls depict the storms as the work of Raijin, the thunder god, whipping his drums to summon the gales, while Fujin, the wind deity, unleashed his bag of tempests. But the spiritual significance runs deeper. To the Japanese, these weren't random acts of nature, they were the direct consequence of prayer. Emperor Kemyama had ordered priests to chant ceaselessly at the grand shrine of eyes, begging the sun goddess Amaterasu for protection. When the storms came, it was seen as a sacred covenant. So long as the people honored the kami would shield the land. Modern historians still grapple with the scale of these events. Chinese records confirm the Mongols lost upward of 20,000 men in the second invasion alone, a disaster so complete that Kublai Khan abandoned his ambitions for Japan entirely. Marine archaeologists have found wreckage along the coastline, Mongol anchors fused with coral, shattered hulls bearing burns from Greek fire, yet nothing explains the storm's uncanny timing. Meteorologists note that typhoons rarely strike the same region twice in such precise intervals, leading some to theorize about a cyclical weather pattern lost to history. But for the Japanese, the message was clear. Centuries later, as World War II reached their shores, the term kamikaze would resurface, this time applied to suicide pilots, a desperate echo of that ancient belief in divine winds sacrificing themselves for the nation's survival. The legacy lingers in quieter ways too. Visit the beaches of Hakata Bay today, and locals will point to the Mongol mounds, mass graves where the drowned invaders were buried with eerie respect. Annual festivals reenact the storms with drums and swirling banners, not as celebrations of enemy deaths, but as reminders of fragility and gratitude. Even science pays oblique homage. Japan's early warning systems for typhoons are among the world's most advanced, as if the memory of those 13th century winds still whispers in the national consciousness. Was it truly the hand of the gods, or a twist of fate so improbable it demanded myth? Perhaps the answer lies in a detail often overlooked. The kamikaze typhoons didn't just save Japan. They spared the Mongols too. Had the invasion succeeded, Kublai Khan's overstretched empire might have collapsed decades earlier under rebellion and famine. Sometimes the most divine interventions are the ones that save us from our own ambitions. Dust swirled through Jerusalem's streets as the disciples squinted at the man hunched by the temple gates, blind from birth, his fingers tracing the grooves of his begging bowl. "Rabbi," they asked Jesus, "who sinned to cause this, him or his parents?" The question hung thick with ancient assumptions, suffering as divine punishment. But what happened next would shatter those beliefs forever. Kneeling in the dirt, Jesus spat on the ground, mixed clay with his fingers, and smeared it over the man's hollow eyes. "Go wash in the pool of Siloam," he instructed. Moments later, the man who'd never seen light stumbled back, blinking at his own hands, at faces gasping in recognition, his whole world rewritten in an instant. This miracle, recorded in John's Gospel, wasn't just about physical sight. Every detail crackles with symbolism. Siloam means sent, a nod to Jesus as God's messenger. The clay, early Christian writers saw an echo of Genesis, God shaping humanity from earth, now recreated through divine touch. Even the Pharisees' furious interrogation afterward becomes part of the drama, with the healed man's bold reply carving a new paradigm. "One thing I know, I was blind and now I see." Theological ripples spread far beyond that Jerusalem afternoon. For persecuted Christians in Rome's catacombs, this story was painted on walls as code, light conquering darkness under the empire's nose. Medieval mystics like Hildegard of Bingen saw in it a metaphor for spiritual awakening, the soul's eyes scraped clear of sin's film. Modern neurologists offer another lens. Congenital blindness rewiring to process visual stimuli would defy medical understanding even today. Yet the real shockwave lies in Jesus' initial response to the disciples. Neither this man nor his parents sinned. This happened so God's works might be displayed. Here was divinity refusing to weaponize disability, instead framing it as a canvas for grace. Archaeology adds startling texture to the tale. Excavations at Siloam reveal a stepped pool fed by the Gihon spring, its waters believed to have ritual significance. A 2,000-year-old inscription found there confirms its name, placing the miracle in tangible geography. But the most haunting evidence isn't carved in stone, it's in the countless artistic depictions across centuries. From Byzantine mosaics showing the moment of awakening to Appalachian spirituals crooning "Amazing Grace," the blind man's story transcends doctrine, becoming universal shorthand for transformation. Skeptics have proposed natural explanations, perhaps a psychological blindness cured by suggestion, or a historical case of hysterical amblyopia. Yet none account for the account's layered brilliance, the man's fearless defiance of religious authorities, or Jesus' subversion of purity laws by working with saliva on the Sabbath. Early critics like Celsus mocked the miracle as crude magic, but even he couldn't dismiss its cultural impact. By the 3rd century, Tertullian reported pagans attempting Christian healings, their failures only deepening belief in Jesus' unique authority. Today, the pool of Siloam still trickles beneath Jerusalem's streets, its waters now diverted through Ottoman-era pipes. Pilgrims kneel there, not just to commemorate a miracle, but to confront its enduring challenge. What does it mean to truly see? For some, it's a call to recognize divinity in unexpected places, the disabled, the outcast, the ones society assumes are beyond help. For others, it's a reminder that light often comes through messy, earthy means, spit and mud, struggle and doubt. Maybe that's why this story outlasts empires. It's not about spectacle, but the moment a beggar wipes his eyes and gasps as the world floods in, raw and radiant for the very first time. The crowd stretched farther than the eye could see, 5,000 men, plus women and children, their stomachs growling as dusk settled over the Galilean hillside. Jesus' disciples panicked. "Send them away," they urged, counting their meager supplies: 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, barely enough for a child's lunch. What happened next would become one of the most debated miracles in history. Taking the food, Jesus looked heavenward, gave thanks, and began breaking pieces that kept coming, passing from hand to hand until every last person ate their fill. Not just scraps, but baskets of leftovers, 12 in all, were gathered afterward. Each gospel account adds revealing details. Mark emphasizes the disciples' disbelief, their practicality clashing with divine possibility. John's version, the most symbolic, notes the bread was barley, the poor man's grain, highlighting how abundance emerges from humility. Luke alone mentions Jesus organizing the crowd into groups, a hint that this wasn't chaos but sacred order unfolding. Matthew's account, concise yet powerful, frames it as a mirror to Moses feeding Israel with manna, positioning Jesus as the new lawgiver. Modern skeptics propose theories to demystify the event. Some suggest a stone soup effect. Inspired by Jesus' generosity, those hiding food in their cloaks shared it, creating a ripple of charity. Others cite mass psychogenesis, a collective hallucination sparked by fervent belief. But these explanations stumble on the gospel's specificity. 12 baskets remaining, the exact count mirroring Israel's tribes, a detail too precise for myth-making. The deeper wonder lies in the miracle's layering. Early Christians saw Eucharist foreshadowed, the broken bread becoming sustenance for multitudes. Medieval artists depicted the scene with golden light radiating from Christ's hands, while theologians like Augustine interpreted the 5 loaves as the 5 books of Moses, transformed into spiritual food. Science offers curious parallels. Quantum physics now speaks of multiplying particles at subatomic levels, where observation affects reality. Could faith have unlocked a similar principle? Anthropologists note shared meal rituals across cultures as moments where community transcends lack. Yet nothing explains how a first-century Jewish preacher, miles from supply lines, left thousands convinced they'd witnessed the impossible. Perhaps the most poignant clue comes from a 4th-century pilgrim's diary describing a mosaic near the miracle's traditional site. It showed not just the multiplied food, but the faces of those eating, some weeping, others laughing, all lit with a joy the artist couldn't quite capture. That mosaic is lost now, but its message lingers. Miracles aren't just about what's multiplied, but who's transformed in the breaking. The winter of 1858 in Lourdes, France, was bitter. A bone-chilling draft seeped through the cracks of the old mill where 14-year-old Bernadette Soubirous slept on a lice-infested pallet. Her family, once prosperous, now scavenged firewood to survive. Then, on February 11th, while gathering kindling near the grotto of Massabielle, the air suddenly stilled. A golden mist curled from the damp rock, and within it stood a woman no taller than a child's doll, draped in white with blue sash and yellow roses at her feet. Bernadette would later describe the apparition's eyes as not like ours they saw inside me. Over 18 encounters between February and July, the woman who eventually identified herself as the Immaculate Conception led Bernadette to uncover a hidden spring. Though the water first appeared muddy, crowds soon witnessed the girl digging with bare hands, drinking from the sludge, even smearing it on her face as the apparition instructed. Within days, reports of healings began. A woman's paralyzed arm regained motion after immersion. A dying infant revived when washed with the water. The local priest, initially skeptical, demanded proof, something only heaven could provide. On March 25th, Bernadette returned with the woman's cryptic title, "I am the Immaculate Conception." The phrase stunned clergy. This peasant girl, barely literate, couldn't have known it was the exact wording Pope Pius IX had used 4 years prior to define Mary's sinless nature in Catholic dogma. Science has scrutinized Lourdes like no other miracle site. The Lourdes Medical Bureau, established in 1883, employs teams of secular doctors to examine alleged healings. Of 7,000 cases reviewed, only 70 have been declared medically inexplicable by the Church. One stands out: Jean-Pierre Bailly, a Frenchman with advanced multiple sclerosis, wheeled into the baths in 1987, paralyzed and blind. Minutes after immersion, he stood unaided, his vision restored. Neurologists testifying at his canonical investigation confirmed his MRI scans showed irreversible nerve damage, yet his recovery was total. Even the Bureau's atheist founder, Dr. Alexis Carrel, converted after witnessing a terminal tuberculosis patient's lungs clear overnight. Critics argue placebo effect or misdiagnosis, pointing to Lourdes' rejection rate. 99.9% of cases lack scientific validation. But the water itself adds another wrinkle. Chemical analyses show no special properties, it's ordinary spring water with trace minerals. Yet pilgrims report an uncanny pattern. Healings often occur not at the grotto, but during the journey home, as if grace respects the boundaries of doubt and faith. Lourdes today is a paradox, a place where wheelchairs line up like sentinels at the baths, where hope hums in candlelit processions, yet where most pilgrims return unhealed. The real miracle may be subtler. Bernadette, canonized in 1933, spent her final years as a nun in grueling illness, once quipping, "The Virgin used me like a broom." What do you do with a broom when you've swept? You put it back in its place. Her humility echoes in the grotto's graffiti, notes in dozens of languages, not all pleading for cures, many simply saying, "I was here. I believed." Perhaps that's the enduring mystery of Lourdes. Not the water, not the visions, but the way a girl's encounter with the divine continues to hold space for both the miraculous and the unanswered, where a single spring, bubbling from unremarkable rock, invites the world to consider that healing might wear many faces. The wind howled across the delta with an unnatural ferocity, peeling back the waters like parchment torn in two. On one side, Pharaoh's chariots thundered closer, their bronze wheels churning mud. On the other, a wall of seawater stood suspended, its crest frozen mid-crash as if time itself had fractured. For the Israelites fleeing Egypt, the Red Sea's parting wasn't just a miracle, it was the fulcrum on which their survival hinged. The Book of Exodus paints the scene with cinematic dread and wonder. Moses stretching his staff over the waters, a pillar of fire holding back the Egyptian army, and finally, those impossible corridors opening in the deep, their floors slick with exposed seabed. But what really happened that night? The biblical account offers tantalizing clues. The Hebrew term Yam Suf might not mean Red Sea, but Sea of Reeds, a marshy region near the Nile Delta. This detail has led scholars like Dr. Bruce Parker, former chief scientist of the National Ocean Service, to propose a phenomenon called wind set down. When sustained winds of over 60 miles per hour blow across shallow waters, they can push the sea back for hours, exposing dry land. Satellite images of the Nile Delta show a lagoon near ancient Pi Ramesses where such an event could occur, with waters retreating nearly 2 miles under the right conditions. Even the timing fits. Exodus describes a strong east wind blowing all night, coinciding with seasonal wind patterns in the region. Yet the geological explanation only deepens the mystery. For the Israelites, this wasn't just a lucky escape, it was divine theater. The narrative brims with symbolism. The sea, a symbol of chaos in Near Eastern mythology, subdued by Yahweh's command. The 12 dry paths, as some Jewish midrash suggests, representing the 12 tribes walking in parallel. The walls of water echoing the creation narrative where God separates the waters from the firmament. The moment the sea crashes back, swallowing Pharaoh's army, isn't merely vengeance, it's the birth of a people. As historian Jonathan Sacks observed, before the Red Sea, the Israelites were slaves fleeing their masters. After it, they were a nation with a destiny. Modern archaeology adds another layer. While no evidence of drowned chariots has been found, excavations in the Sinai reveal Egyptian outposts abandoned around the 13th century BC, the likely time frame for Exodus. A stele from Pharaoh Merneptah's reign mentions Israel as a people already in canon, suggesting a formative migration, but perhaps the most compelling proof lies in the story's endurance. For 3,000 years, Passover sedders have retold the tale, with participants dipping fingers in wine to recall the sea's divided waters. The event became a template for liberation movements worldwide, from enslaved Africans singing "Go Down Moses" to Guatemalan rebels painting Exodus murals in their strongholds. Science may one day pinpoint the exact winds that parted the waters, but it will never explain why this particular escape among countless ancient migrations became indelible. Maybe because the story isn't about hydrology, but the audacious belief that when oppression seems insurmountable, the very laws of nature might bend to carve a path forward. Or as the Talmud puts it, at the Red Sea, even the lowliest maidservant saw what the prophet Ezekiel never beheld. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, only witnessed. The morning mist clung to Tepeyac Hill as Juan Diego, an Aztec convert to Christianity, hurried toward Mexico City. It was December 9, 1531, and the 57-year-old farmer had urgent news for the bishop. His uncle was gravely ill and he needed a priest. Then the sound of birdsong, unlike any he'd heard before, stopped him in his tracks. The air filled with golden light, and there, standing where an Aztec temple to Tonantzin once stood, appeared a radiant woman speaking Nahuatl, his native tongue. Juanito, she called him tenderly, announcing herself as the Virgin Mary and instructing him to request a church be built on that sacred ground. When Bishop Zumarraga demanded proof, the Virgin gave Juan Diego an impossible task: gather roses atop the barren, frost-covered hill. Climbing Tepeyac, his cloak, a tilma woven from cactus fibers, flapped in the wind as he gasped at the sight before him. Castilian roses, foreign to Mexico and blooming impossibly in winter, tumbled into his cloak. But the real miracle unfolded when he opened his tilma before the bishop. The roses scattered to reveal something far more astonishing: an image of the Virgin imprinted on the coarse fabric. Her features a perfect blend of indigenous and Spanish traits, her mantle spangled with stars mirroring the Mexican winter sky. The tilma defies every law of material science. Made from agave fibers that normally deteriorate within 20 years, it remains vibrant after nearly 5 centuries, no fading, no fraying. Scientists examining it in 1979 found the image has no brushstrokes, no underdrawing, and the pigments show no binding agents. NASA researchers analyzing the stars on her mantle discovered they precisely match the constellations over Mexico City on December 12, 1531. Even more perplexing, the Virgin's eyes, when magnified, reveal microscopic reflections, figures that match Juan Diego, the bishop, and the interpreter present at the original unveiling, as if the tilma captured the moment like a photographic negative. Beyond the scientific enigma lies the miracle's cultural seismic shift. The image symbolism spoke directly to Aztec cosmology. Her blue-green mantle evoked Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent deity, while her black maternity belt signaled Tonantzin, the mother goddess. Within 7 years of the apparition, 9 million indigenous Mexicans converted to Christianity, not through conquest, but because they recognized their own sacred language in her image. Today, the Basilica of Guadalupe stands as Christianity's most visited pilgrimage site, where the tilma hangs unprotected by glass or climate control, yet remains intact. Skeptics have proposed theories from fungal growth creating the image to clever colonial propaganda, but none explain how the tilma survived a nitric acid spill in 1785 that should have dissolved it, or why Marian apparitions worldwide never produced comparable physical evidence. Perhaps the most poignant testimony comes from an unlikely source: Dr. Philip Callahan, a University of Florida biophysicist and devout atheist who studied the tilma in 1979. After months of analysis, he reluctantly concluded, "There is no scientific explanation. It's as if the image was projected onto the fibers by some means we cannot comprehend." For millions, the real miracle isn't just the tilma's endurance, but what it represents: a divine encounter that didn't erase indigenous identity but sanctified it. When Juan Diego's uncle, miraculously healed, described the Virgin calling herself Santa Maria de Guadalupe, scholars noted the name echoed the Aztec word Cotlaxopa, she who crushes the serpent. Whether coincidence or providence, the message was clear: faith could bridge worlds without destroying either. 5 centuries later, as pilgrims crawl on their knees toward the basilica, their whispered prayers carry that same impossible hope that the sacred might still touch the ordinary, leaving traces even science cannot erase. The wheat fields of Domremy swayed under a sky thick with the smoke of 100 burning villages. France was unraveling. It was here, in the year 1425, that a 13-year-old peasant girl named Joan first heard the voice. Not a whisper, not a dream, but a ringing command that shook her to the core. "Daughter of God, you must go to the Dauphin and save France." Over the next 4 years, the voices multiplied: Saint Michael with his warrior's fire, Saint Catherine with her gentle resolve, Saint Margaret with her crown of light, all repeating the same impossible directive: a girl in homespun wool must rally broken armies and crown a king. What makes Joan's story so electrifying isn't just her eventual victories at Orleans and Patay, but the visceral detail preserved in her trial transcripts. When interrogated by skeptical clerics, she described the voices with startling precision. "They came with a great light," she insisted, "and when they leave, I weep because they are so beautiful." Modern neurologists have proposed temporal lobe epilepsy, or auditory pareidolia, the brain's tendency to impose meaning on random noise, but these theories stumble on Joan's tactical genius. How could hallucinations teach an illiterate farm girl to outmaneuver English longbowmen with unorthodox strategies, like attacking fortified positions head-on during religious feasts when defenders were drunk? The records from her trial in Rouen reveal even stranger layers. Asked if her saints spoke English, Joan snapped, "Why would they? They are not on the English side." A reply too sly for mere psychosis. When her judges demanded a miracle to prove divine favor, she shot back, "I came not to perform tricks but to liberate Orleans." And liberate it she did, in a campaign that lasted just 9 days, her presence alone reigniting morale in demoralized troops. Soldiers who'd mocked her banner, painted with "Jesus Mary," later swore they saw it glow during battles. Yet the heart of the mystery lies in the voice's specificity. They guided her to locate the hidden sword of Charles Martel behind the altar of St. Catherine's Church, a weapon no peasant could have known about. They warned her of her own capture at Compiègne months in advance. Most hauntingly, they prophesied her death by fire, a fate she accepted with eerie calm, telling her judges, "I will last but a year, use it well." Centuries later, science still grapples with Joan's visions. Psychologists point to trauma-induced dissociation, a plausible theory given the war raging around her childhood home. But how does that explain her ability to identify the Dauphin, Charles VII, disguised among his courtiers, a moment that convinced him of her divine mission? Historians note that medieval Europe teemed with visionaries, yet none matched Joan's political impact. Even her enemies feared her. The English burned her not as a witch but as a heretic, a distinction revealing their terror of her influence. Perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from an unexpected source: Joan's armor. When examined in the 19th century, experts noted its custom fit for someone with a woman's proportions, forged months before her military successes. Who would invest such resources in a delusional peasant unless they, too, sensed something extraordinary? Today, in the quiet of Domremé's chapel, where Joan first heard those life-shattering voices, visitors still report a peculiar phenomenon: the scent of burning wood, though no fire burns. A trick of memory, or the past pressing close, reminding us that some mysteries refuse to be solved, only honored. The air in Jerusalem's Sheep Gate district hung thick with the scent of sweat and desperation. Here, beneath 5 colonnaded porticos, the Pool of Bethesda shimmered, not just a reservoir, but a place of last resort. The sick clustered around its edges, the blind, the lame, the withered, all waiting for a legend to come true. It was said an angel would occasionally stir the waters, and whoever stepped in first would be healed. For 38 years, one man had watched this ritual unfold, his paralyzed limbs trapping him in the dust as others rushed past. Then, on a day like any other, a stranger knelt beside him and asked a question that would shatter his world. "Do you want to get well?" The Gospel of John captures the moment with startling clarity. Jesus doesn't wait for the man's stammered reply. "Get up," he commands, "pick up your mat and walk." And just like that, muscles dead for decades snap to life. The man rolls up the ragged pallet that had been his prison, stepping into a reality he'd long ago stopped dreaming of. But the miracle isn't just in the healing, it's in the timing. Jesus performs this act on the Sabbath, deliberately flouting religious laws against carrying burdens, igniting a firestorm among Jewish leaders. Their outrage reveals the deeper message: divine mercy isn't bound by human rules. For centuries, skeptics dismissed Bethesda as myth until archaeologists in the 1860s uncovered its ruins near St. Anne's Church in Jerusalem. The excavation revealed not one pool, but twin reservoirs flanked by the very 5 porticos John described. Even more compelling, carvings of an angel holding a pitcher were found nearby, suggesting a long-standing tradition of healing waters. The discovery forced historians to reconsider: was this simply a place where mineral springs caused temporary relief, or had something extraordinary once happened there? Early Christians saw in this miracle a blueprint for salvation. The man's 38-year wait paralleled Israel's 38 years of wandering in Deuteronomy, symbolizing humanity's spiritual paralysis before Christ's intervention. Church fathers like Augustine marveled that Jesus didn't help the man into the pool. He rendered the pool irrelevant. The water was stirred not to heal the body, Augustine wrote, but to awaken thirst for the true healer. Modern medicine offers intriguing parallels. Doctors treating psychosomatic paralysis note that sudden, profound emotional triggers can restore motor function. Could Christ's words have unlocked neural pathways frozen by trauma? But the man's later encounter with Jesus in the temple compounds the mystery. "See, you are well again," Jesus tells him. "Stop sinning, or something worse may happen." The warning implies his condition stemmed from more than mere misfortune, hinting at a link between spiritual and physical brokenness that still resonates today. Standing by the excavated pool now, its steps worn smooth by ancient footsteps, one detail lingers. The man never asked for healing, he'd resigned himself to his mat. Perhaps that's the real miracle, not just the restoring of legs, but the rekindling of hope in a heart that had stopped daring to want anything at all. Deep in Japan's Akita prefecture, in a humble convent chapel, a wooden statue of the Virgin Mary stood bathed in candlelight, its face serene, hands folded in prayer. Then, on June 28, 1973, Sister Agnes Sasagawa noticed something impossible. Beads of moisture formed in the statue's downcast eyes, gathering into glistening trails that dripped onto the pedestal below. Over the next 6 years, the phenomenon would repeat 101 times, witnessed by dozens, including the local bishop, each tear leaving behind a faint, salty residue. But what made Akita chillingly distinct wasn't just the weeping. The statue's lips sometimes moved during Sister Agnes's prayers, and on one occasion, a gaping wound appeared on its right hand, vanishing 3 days later without a trace. The Vatican's investigation uncovered stranger details still. Sister Agnes, deaf since 1954, reported hearing the statue speak 3 messages warnings of global catastrophe unless humanity repented. Even skeptics were unsettled when her hearing suddenly returned during a mass in 1982, coinciding with the statue's final tear. Scientific tests on the tears found human proteins and type B blood, matching relics of Christ's passion. Bishop John Ito, initially cautious, became the statue's foremost advocate after witnessing multiple weeping events himself, eventually declaring Akita worthy of belief in 1984, a rare official endorsement for modern Marian phenomena. Comparisons to other weeping statues reveal eerie patterns. In Syracuse, Sicily, a plaster Madonna shed tears in 1953, later found to contain sodium chloride and urea identical to human tears. Nueva Esperanza, Honduras's weeping statue in 2016 left puddles so copious they were collected in vials, yet Akita stands apart for its specificity. The wounds mirrored Sister Agnes's own stigmata, and the prophecies down to the Church's future persecution echoed Fatima's secrets. Neurologists propose mass hysteria or environmental factors. High humidity can cause wooden statues to sweat, while capillary action might draw liquid from concealed reservoirs, but none explain Akita's wounds, voice phenomena, or the deaf nun's healing. Perhaps the deepest mystery lies in the messages themselves. The third warning, fire will fall from the sky and wipe out a great part of humanity, was delivered months before the Chernobyl disaster. Coincidence or a divine alarm bell ringing across cultures through a humble statue in Japan, begging the question, what if heaven's tears are the one language everyone understands? Today, the Akita statue sits silent in its chapel, its dry eyes still drawing pilgrims who press tissues to the wood, hoping for one more sign. Whether miracle or mystery, its legacy endures as a whisper across time, that sometimes the sacred weeps not for effect, but because we've forgotten how to. The stench hit them before they reached the tomb. 4 days dead in the Judean heat, Lazarus's body would already be swelling with decay. Martha, his sister, blocked the path with grief and practicality. Lord, by now there is a bad odor. What happened next in Bethany wasn't just a miracle, it was a theological earthquake. Jesus, weeping not for the dead but for the unbelief around him, shouted toward the stone-sealed cave, "Lazarus, come out." And the man who'd been wrapped in burial linen staggered into sunlight, his grave clothes flapping like a second skin. This moment, recorded only in John's Gospel, carries explosive significance. Unlike earlier healings, Lazarus was incontrovertibly deceased. Jewish tradition held the soul lingered for 3 days before departing, making his 4-day decomposition a public certainty. The miracle was staged almost theatrically. Jesus delayed his journey despite knowing Lazarus was dying, telling disciples plainly, "This sickness will not end in death," yet allowing the family to endure despair so you may believe. When he finally arrived, he asked bystanders to roll away the stone themselves, forcing them to participate in the impossible. Early Christians wielded this story as a crowbar against doubt. In Roman catacombs, frescoes of Lazarus wrapped in mummy bands appeared beside depictions of Jonah, both symbols of resurrection hope. But the theological implications cut deeper. Jesus' command, "Loose him and let him go," a mirrored language used in Greek mystery religions for spiritual liberation, suggesting physical resurrection as a metaphor for breaking sin's bonds. The early church Father Tertullian argued it proved Jesus held keys to both spiritual and bodily resurrection, a direct challenge to Gnostic sects that denied physical afterlife. Modern skeptics propose alternative readings. Some suggest Lazarus was in a coma, though first-century Jews were adept at recognizing death. Others note the story's absence in other Gospels, speculating it was a late addition. But archaeology adds weight to John's account. Excavations at Bethany reveal first-century tombs with rolling stones matching the described mechanics. More tellingly, Jewish records from the era mention a Yeshua being banned from the temple for raising a corpse, an oblique possible reference to the scandal this miracle caused. The real power of the story lies in its messy humanity. Lazarus emerges not as a radiant spirit, but a stumbling, stinking man needing help unwinding his shrouds. Early Eastern Orthodox icons capture this vividly. They show him not as a triumphant figure, but with his hands still bound, symbolizing that resurrection begins before the grave clothes fully fall away. Perhaps the most haunting detail comes from later tradition. An apocryphal account claims Lazarus never smiled again in his second life, burdened by memories of what lay beyond. Whether fact or folklore, it reminds us that miracles aren't parlor tricks, they're disruptions, collisions of heaven and earth that leave everyone involved forever changed. The streets of Calanda in northeastern Spain were quiet that March night in 1640, the kind of stillness that comes when even the wind holds its breath. Miguel Juan Pellicer, a 23-year-old farmhand, lay in his family's cramped home, the stump of his right leg wrapped in ragged bandages. 2 years earlier, a harvesting cart had crushed the limb so badly that surgeons in Valencia sawed it off above the knee. He'd learned to hobble on a wooden peg, begging at churches for scraps until tonight, when something extraordinary unfolded. After praying before a statue of the Virgin of the Pillar, Miguel fell into a deep sleep. His mother, checking on him hours later, screamed so loudly the neighbors came running. There, under the blanket, was a leg pink, warm and whole, where only scar tissue had been hours before. The miracle of Calanda stands apart from other divine interventions because of its sheer physicality. This wasn't a vision or a healing. It was the spontaneous regeneration of a fully formed limb, complete with muscle, bone, and even the scar from his childhood. The Catholic Church, notoriously skeptical of such claims, launched an investigation so rigorous it could rival a modern courtroom. Over 50 witnesses testified under oath: the local barber who'd shaved Miguel's amputated leg before surgery, the priest who'd watched him beg at the shrine, even the surgeon who identified the reattached limb by a distinctive mole. Notaries documented every detail, from the leg's warm temperature to the way Miguel could flex his toes on command. Even King Philip IV of Spain ordered his own inquiry, fascinated by a miracle that left behind not just faith but flesh and blood. Science has no framework for this kind of restoration. Modern medicine can sometimes reattach severed limbs with microsurgery, but spontaneous regeneration of a leg gone for over 2 years defies every biological principle. Researchers studying salamander limb regrowth note it requires stem cells and weeks of growth, not an instantaneous reappearance. Skeptics suggest mass hallucination or fraud, but the paper trail crushes those theories. The original amputation records from Valencia's hospital still exist, signed by 3 physicians, and Miguel's wooden peg was found discarded in the corner of his room, suddenly obsolete. What makes Calanda especially haunting is its lingering physical evidence. The restored leg was slightly shorter than the original, causing Miguel to limp for the rest of his life, an odd detail for a divine act unless perfection wasn't the point. The Church eventually declared the miracle authentic, not because it defied logic, but because the testimony was too consistent to dismiss. Today, pilgrims still visit the shrine where Miguel prayed, some leaving crutches behind in hopeful imitation. But perhaps the most telling clue lies in the Virgin of the Pillar's own legend. She's said to have appeared to Saint James in Zaragoza atop a pillar that never deteriorates, as if anchoring the miraculous firmly in the tangible. Calanda doesn't offer easy answers. It's a story that hinges on a paradox, a miracle so concrete it left courtroom evidence, yet so baffling that even now, centuries later, the only response is to stand in the dim light of that Spanish farmhouse, staring at a young man wiggling toes that shouldn't exist, and wonder, what if the boundary between the impossible and the real is thinner than we dare believe? The desert stretched endlessly under a searing sun, its sands shifting like a restless ocean. For the Israelites fleeing Egypt, every step into the unknown could mean disaster, ambush, thirst, or simply losing their way in the trackless wilderness. Then, as dusk fell on the second day, a shape flickered against the darkening sky. Not a cloud, not a storm, but a towering pillar of fire, its glow pulsing like a heartbeat across the dunes. By day, it became a column of swirling cloud, shielding them from the desert's furnace. By night, flames lit their path with an unearthly radiance. This was no mere weather phenomenon. Exodus describes it with uncanny precision. The pillar didn't just illuminate, it led, shifting direction to mark their route, stopping when they camped, moving when they journeyed. A divine GPS etched in fire and vapor. Scholars have wrestled with the pillar's nature for millennia. Ancient Jewish commentators like Rashi saw it as a manifestation of the Shekinah, God's dwelling presence, a mobile sanctuary for a people without a home. Early Christians, drawing parallels to Christ's transfiguration, interpreted the dual pillars as symbols of divine guidance, the cloud representing the Holy Spirit, the fire foreshadowing Pentecost's flames. But the scientific angle is equally fascinating. Meteorologists point to rare atmospheric events like volcanic dust clouds or firewhirls spinning columns of flame that can tower hundreds of feet. The Sinai's geology, with its pockets of natural gas and silica-rich sands, could theoretically create such phenomena under extreme conditions, yet none explain how a natural occurrence could intelligently guide a migrating nation for 40 years. Cross-cultural parallels deepen the mystery. Egyptian texts describe Pharaoh Thutmose III following a pillar of heaven fire during military campaigns. Hindu scriptures speak of Agni, the fire god, leading ancestors in a flaming chariot. Even the Greek historian Diodorus Siculus recorded nomadic tribes following a burning column in the Arabian desert. These echoes suggest something beyond coincidence, a shared memory of divine guidance etched into humanity's oldest stories. The pillar's strategic role is often overlooked. When Pharaoh's chariots gave chase, Exodus notes the pillar shifted position, placing itself between the Israelites and their pursuers, a literal wall of divine defense. Jewish Midrash imagines the cloud sprouting fiery arrows to blind Egyptian horses, while the Qumran scrolls describe its light healing Israelites' wounds. This wasn't passive guidance, it was active, tactical intervention. Perhaps the most haunting detail lies in what the pillar didn't do. It didn't eliminate the desert's hardships. The people still hungered, still complained, still faced choices. The fire lit the way but didn't drag them forward. In that sense, the pillar becomes a metaphor for faith itself, a light that makes the next step possible but never forces the foot to lift. Today, the pillar's legacy flickers in unexpected places. Desert Bedouins still tell of jinn fires that mislead the wicked but guide the pure. Astronomers analyzing satellite images of the Sinai have detected unexplained thermal anomalies along the traditional Exodus route. And in every generation, the image resurfaces, whether in the lanterns of Hanukkah or the flaming bush of African American spirituals, as if the pillar's light refuses to be extinguished. Maybe that's the real miracle, not the fire itself, but the stubborn hope it represents that even in life's bleakest wastes, something sacred still burns, waiting to show the way. The rooftop watchers in Zaytown, Egypt, that April night in 1968 had no idea they were about to witness one of the most documented supernatural events of the 20th century. It started with a flash of light so sudden that mechanics at a nearby garage dropped their tools, thinking a transformer had exploded. But then the glow condensed into a shimmering figure hovering above the dome of St. Mary's Coptic Church. A woman bathed in silver-blue light, her arms outstretched as if blessing the crowd that now spilled into the streets below. Within hours, word spread like wildfire. Thousands of Muslims, Christians, even government officials and skeptical journalists flocked to the site, all reporting the same impossible sight. The Virgin Mary, silent and radiant, performing what witnesses called a dance of light between the church's twin spires. What makes Zaytown extraordinary isn't just the scale of the phenomenon, it's the sheer diversity of those who saw it. A Muslim taxi driver named Farouk Atwa, initially convinced it was a trick, brought binoculars only to drop them in shock when the figure waved at him. Egypt's then President Gamal Abdel Nasser dispatched police and scientists who documented the apparition for weeks as it reappeared nearly every night, sometimes accompanied by dove-like lights that fizzed through the air without burning observers. Most startling were the reports from pilots circling Cairo International Airport, who radioed confused requests for ground control to explain the unidentified luminous object interfering with their flight paths. Science still grapples with Zeittown. Government investigations ruled out holograms. The technology barely existed in 1968 and found no evidence of mass hallucination. Physicists noted similarities to ball lightning or plasma formations, yet none could account for the figure's humanoid shape or its selective appearances above a single church for 3 consecutive years. Even more baffling were the healings. Over 24 cases were formally documented, including a blind woman who regained sight after the apparition showered her with light, and a boy with polio who stood unaided for the first time after touching one of the mysterious doves. The Coptic Church, cautious about endorsing miracles, only confirmed the event's supernatural character after a 7-year investigation, highlighting that many witnesses had no Christian affiliation, eliminating bias as a factor. The global response was equally astonishing. Soviet spies stationed in Cairo secretly photographed the phenomenon, convinced it was a Western weapon, while American newspapers splashed headlines like "Virgin Mary visits the Middle East" alongside sober quotes from astrophysicists. Even the usually restrained BBC aired a documentary admitting, "No prosaic explanation fits the facts, yet the real mystery lies in the timing." Zeittown's apparitions began exactly 1 year after Israel's 6-day war left Egypt humiliated, and on the Coptic calendar's Feast of Mary's entry into Egypt, a date commemorating the Holy Family's refuge there 2,000 years earlier. Coincidence or a divine reminder that hope flickers brightest in the darkest hours? Today, the church's rooftop still bears faint scorch marks some claim were left by the luminous figure. Pilgrims lean over the railing when night watchmen first spotted the glow, squinting at the Cairo skyline as if expecting the miracle to repeat. It never does. But perhaps that's the point. Zeittown wasn't about spectacle, it was about presence. In a fractured land where faiths often clashed for one fleeting season, Muslims and Christians stood shoulder to shoulder, all whispering the same word, Marian. Proof, some say, that the sacred speaks louder than dogma, and sometimes the most miraculous thing isn't what descends from the sky, but what it leaves behind in human hearts. The Roman centurion stood in the dusty streets of Capernaum, his armor glinting under the Galilean sun, but his expression etched with something rare for a battle-hardened soldier: desperation. His servant, likely a slave, though treated more like family, lay paralyzed in his home, racked with agony. What happened next would become one of the most radical moments in Scripture. Instead of barging into Jesus' path like others seeking miracles, this officer of the occupying force hung back, sending Jewish elders to plead his case. When Jesus finally approached, the centurion stopped him with a staggering declaration. "Lord, I am not worthy to have you under my roof, but just say the word and my servant will be healed." This wasn't just humility, it was theological audacity. Roman military men worshipped Mars and Mithras, gods who demanded blood sacrifices, not whispered prayers. Yet here was a centurion comparing Jesus' authority to his own chain of command. "I say to one soldier, go," and he goes, implying Christ's power transcended space. The crowd braced for outrage. Instead, Jesus marveled, turning to his followers with a bombshell statement. "I have not found such great faith even in Israel." Then, without stepping foot in the house, he spoke the words, "Go, let it be done as you believed." At that very moment, miles away, the servant rose from his sick hold. The miracle's layers unfold like a masterclass in early Christian outreach. By healing a Gentile servant remotely, Jesus shattered cultural taboos twice over, crossing ethnic barriers and demonstrating power unbound by physical proximity. Early church fathers like Origen latched onto this, using the story to appeal to pagan audiences. "See," they'd argue, Your own commanders recognize Christ's divinity before priests do. The centurion's word alone, theology even found echoes in Roman military culture, where a superior's utterance imperium carried irrevocable force. Modern readers often miss the political dynamite here. Roman law treated slaves as property, yet Jesus prioritized a nameless servant's life over social hierarchies. The centurion's unworthiness subverted imperial pride, modeling a faith that didn't require temple rituals or ethnic purity. Early Christian mosaics in Rome drive the point home, depicting the scene near military barracks, a quiet rebuke to soldiers still sacrificing to Jupiter. Science offers intriguing angles too. Remote healing studies like Harvard's prayer experiments show ambiguous but tantalizing data on intentionality affecting health across distances. The servant's sudden recovery aligns with psychosomatic research, where profound belief can trigger dramatic physiological shifts, though no study explains instantaneous cures. But the real miracle might be the story's endurance. In Catholic Mass, millions still echo the centurion's words before communion, "Lord, I am not worthy." A phrase bridging 2,000 years of seekers standing in that same Capernaum street, awestruck that divine power meets faith, not in temples or titles, but in the quiet courage to say, just say the word. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem hums with an energy that defies the centuries' crackling anticipation, whispered prayers, the occasional scuffle of monks jostling for position. Then, as the Orthodox patriarch kneels inside the edicule, the tiny chapel built over Christ's tomb, something extraordinary unfolds. The air itself seems to thicken, then without spark or flint, a blue-white flame flickers to life in the darkness. This is the miracle of the Holy Fire, an event witnessed annually on the Saturday before Orthodox Easter for over 1,000 years. Pilgrims pack the ancient church, their unlit candle bundles trembling in their hands as they wait for the fire to spread through the crowd like liquid light, many claiming it burns without scorching skin for those first sacred moments. The ceremony's roots tangle deep into history. Byzantine manuscripts from the 9th century describe the phenomenon, while Crusader accounts marvel at flames that leaped from stone to stone along the church's walls. Orthodox tradition holds that the fire ignites only after intense prayer, a divine response to faith's persistence. The rituals surrounding it are precise. The patriarch enters the tomb bare-handed, his vestments examined for hidden ignition sources by Israeli authorities. Armenian and Coptic clergy stand witness, their presence meant to deter fraud. When the fire emerges, doves are sometimes released into the dome, where believers swear the flames briefly crown the birds' heads like Pentecostal tongues. Yet skepticism shadows the miracle. 19th century British archaeologists speculated about hidden naphtha vents in the tomb's masonry, while modern critics point to chemical tricks like white phosphorus. The fire's behavior fuels debate. Its initial coolness, some claim it doesn't burn beards when first passed hand to hand, clashes with physics. In 2010, a Greek filmmaker allegedly caught footage of a lamp being lit conventionally inside the edicule, though Orthodox scholars counter that this was a preparatory ritual, not the miracle itself. Even the fire's color varies by account, from ethereal blue to golden yellow, as if resisting easy categorization. What makes the holy fire endure isn't just spectacle, but its visceral immediacy. Russian pilgrims describe holding the flame to letters from sick relatives, watching the paper remain unscorched. Ethiopian monks chant as they bathe their faces in it, emerging unharmed. And then there's the fire's journey, transported by helicopter and armored convoy to Greece, Russia, and beyond, where it ignites Easter candles in Orthodox communities worldwide. Scientists who have analyzed transferred samples report unusual spectral lines, but no definitive proof of supernatural origin. Perhaps the real miracle lies in the fire's timing. In 1579, when Armenian and Greek clergy disputed control of the ceremony, the fire failed to appear for hours, a chastening delay that forced reconciliation. During World War II, with Jerusalem under British martial law, the flame reportedly burned brighter than ever, a defiant spark in the darkness. And in 2020, when COVID-19 emptied the church, a lone patriarch emerged with the fire anyway, streaming it globally to millions watching in lockdown. The holy fire, then, isn't just about combustion, it's about continuity. A flame that's outlasted empires, wars, and doubt, not because it conforms to logic, but because it answers a deeper human longing to stand in the dark and witness light kindle itself again and again against all odds. The dust of northern Italy swirled beneath the boots of 30,000 soldiers as Constantine's army camped near the Milvian Bridge. It was October 27, 312, and the fate of Rome hung in the balance. The rival Emperor Maxentius held the capital with forces twice their size, his engineers rigging the Tiber's crossings with deadly traps. That night, as Constantine paced his tent, the air itself seemed to split open. Later, he would describe it to his biographer Eusebius with trembling certainty. A blazing cross hovering above the sun, etched with the words in hoc signo vinces, in this sign conquer. Some accounts claim Christ himself appeared, urging the emperor to paint the sacred symbol on his soldiers' shields. By dawn, Constantine's artisans were scrambling to adapt the labarum, a military standard, with the overlapping Greek letters chi and rho, the first spark of Christian symbolism entering the machinery of war. What unfolded next was less a battle than a divine rout. Maxentius's forces, though entrenched, collapsed like rotted timber. Witnesses reported the Tiber's currents reversing mysteriously, sweeping the tyrant from his horse into the murky depths, his armor dragging him under as if weighted by invisible hands. For the early church, still reeling from Diocletian's persecutions, the victory wasn't just political, it was cosmological. Overnight, the cross morphed from an instrument of Roman shame to an emblem of imperial power. Within a year, Constantine would issue the Edict of Milan, legalizing Christianity across the empire. By 325, he'd convened the Council of Nicaea, where bishops hammered out doctrines that would shape Western thought for millennia. Historians still spar over the vision's nature. Skeptics note Constantine's mother Helena was already Christian, suggesting his conversion was strategic, a way to unify a fractured empire under a rising faith. Others point to the emperor's lingering devotion to Sol Invictus, the sun god, arguing the cross of light resembled solar halos seen during atmospheric phenomena. But the archaeological record hints at something more profound. Excavations of Constantine's later commissions, like Constantinople's towering porphyry column, revealed deliberate syncretism. The Chi-Rho carved alongside sunbursts, as if the emperor saw Christ not as replacing the old gods but fulfilling them. The vision's legacy pulses through unexpected corridors of history. Medieval knights carried the labarum into crusades, while Renaissance painters like Piero della Francesca immortalized Constantine's dream as a pivot between antiquity and Christendom. Even modern militaries unconsciously echo it: the Red Cross emblem, battlefield chaplains, the God with us, inscribed on Nazi belt buckles, a grotesque perversion of the original prophecy. Yet the miracle's deepest impact might be its paradox, a faith born of martyrs now wielded by emperors, its pacifist roots grafted onto the banners of conquest. Perhaps the most haunting artifact sits in Rome's Capitoline museums, a marble hand fractured at the wrist, its fingers clasping nothing. It's all that remains of Constantine's colossal statue, whose face, some say, bore the dazed wonder of a man who'd glimpsed eternity. Whether divine intervention or shrewd propaganda, the Milvian Bridge marked the moment Western civilization lurched onto a new path, one where the spiritual and the political would forever walk arm in arm, for better or worse. The temple in Jerusalem lay in ruins, its golden menorah toppled, its altar defiled. The year was 164 BCE, and Judah Maccabee's ragtag army had just achieved the impossible, driving out the vastly superior forces of the Seleucid Empire. But their victory was bittersweet. The Greeks had desecrated every vessel of sacred oil, leaving only a single cruse, its seal still miraculously intact. Barely enough to keep the menorah burning for a single day, what happened next would become the heartbeat of Jewish survival for centuries to come. Against all logic, that tiny flask of oil burned for 8 full nights, just long enough to press and consecrate fresh oil according to ancient rites. The Talmud's account in Tractate Shabbat crackles with layered meaning. On the surface, it's a story of divine provision, but dig deeper, and it becomes a manifesto of resistance. The miracle wasn't just about oil, it was about sanctity persisting in a broken world. Jewish scholars note the surviving cruse bore the seal of the high priest, a detail often overlooked. This wasn't just any oil, it was oil set apart before the desecration, symbolizing that holiness endures even when institutions collapse. Historical context sharpens the wonder. The Seleucids hadn't merely invaded, they'd banned Jewish practices under penalty of death, sacrificing pigs on the temple altar to assert their dominance. The Maccabees' revolt was as much a cultural uprising as a military one. When that lone cruse burned beyond its natural limits, it sent an electrifying message. Tyranny could vandalize sacred spaces, but not extinguish sacred light. Modern Hanukkah celebrations still echo this defiance. The shamash candle used to kindle the menorah's others represents the original cruse, a humble servant enabling greater illumination. The tradition of placing menorahs in windows, publicizing the miracle, traces to medieval Europe where Jews risked persecution to flaunt their survival. Even the foods lax fried in oil, donuts glistening with jelly become edible sermons about abundance emerging from scarcity. Science offers intriguing parallels. Chemists note that certain plant oils, like olive oil mixed with beeswax, can burn longer than expected under specific conditions. But no natural explanation accounts for the timing, 8 days precisely matching the duration needed to restore ritual purity. The deeper miracle may be how a story about oil became the DNA of Jewish identity. During the Holocaust, prisoners in concentration camps risked execution to fashion makeshift menorahs from potato peels and shoe polish. In 1973, Israeli soldiers lit Hanukkah candles on the front lines of the Yom Kippur War, their flames mirrored in the eyes of men who just faced annihilation. What makes the cruse of oil endure isn't the spectacle of extended combustion, but its quiet radicalism. Unlike parting seas or falling manna, this miracle required human action. The Maccabees had to light the oil before the supernatural kicked in. The message, divine intervention meets human courage halfway. Today, when a child spins a dreidel or adds another candle to the menorah, they're not just commemorating an ancient wonder. They're inheriting a question: how long can your light last when the world tries to snuff it out? The answer, whispered across 22 centuries, remains the same: longer than anyone thinks possible. The funeral procession wound through Nain's narrow streets, the widow's muffled sobs barely audible over the wailing mourners. Her son, her only son, lay stiff on the bier, his face already veiled for burial. In a culture where women without male protectors faced destitution, this wasn't just grief, it was a death sentence. Then, as the crowd pressed toward the city gate, a stranger stepped forward. Jesus, barely known outside Capernaum at this point, locked eyes with the weeping mother. No one asked for his help, no disciples whispered suggestions. He simply touched the funeral bier, an act that should have rendered him ritually unclean, and spoke 2 words that froze the procession in its tracks: "Young man, arise." What happened next wasn't merely resuscitation. The dead man sat up, blinking as if shaken from deep sleep, and began speaking. Luke's gospel lingers on the aftermath, the stunned silence giving way to terrified whispers. "A great prophet has arisen among us," some cried while others gasped. "God has visited his people." These reactions weren't just shock at the miracle itself, but recognition of its deliberate echoes. Centuries earlier, the prophet Elijah had resurrected another widow's son in Zarephath, cementing his divine authority. Now Jesus was replaying that sacred script, but with a crucial twist. Where Elijah stretched himself over the boy 3 times in anguished prayer, Jesus needed only a touch and a command, hinting at a power far beyond prophetic precedent. Early Christians seized on this moment as theological dynamite. Church fathers like Ambrose saw the widow as a symbol of the Gentile church, bereaved until Christ restored her children to life. The scene's placement in Luke's narrative is equally telling. It follows Jesus healing a centurion servant, a Gentile slave, and precedes praise of John the Baptist, creating a thematic chain. Divine compassion knows no social boundaries. Even the location carries weight. Nain sat near Shunem, where Elisha raised another dead boy, another layer of prophetic mirroring that first-century Jews would have instantly recognized. Modern skeptics often overlook the story's cultural landmines. By touching the bier, Jesus violated purity laws that barred contact with the dead. His intervention also disrupted a funeral, a sacred communal event, essentially declaring that raw human need trumps religious protocol. The crowd's reaction underscores how radical this was. They didn't cheer but trembled, realizing they'd witnessed a fundamental reordering of power. Science offers no comfortable explanations. Near-death experiences can't account for a body already prepared for burial, nor do cases of catalepsy, a trance-like state mimicking death, explain the unanimous recognition of his demise. Even more perplexing is the resurrection's aftermath. Unlike Lazarus, who emerged from his tomb wrapped in grave clothes, this young man sat up fully conscious, speaking coherently, as if death had been nothing more than a brief nap. The miracle's lasting legacy lies in its quiet humanity. Jesus didn't perform for crowds like the feeding of the 5,000, or debate theologians like the healing at Bethesda. He saw a broken woman in a backwater town and acted unasked simply because her pain moved him. That's why early Christian art so often depicted this scene in catacomb frescoes. For persecuted believers facing their own funerals, it wasn't just a promise of resurrection. It was proof that even in history's forgotten corners, the divine notices when a widow weeps. The dimly lit cathedral in Turin holds a secret that has baffled scientists, historians, and believers for centuries. A length of linen 14 feet long, bearing the faint, ghostly imprint of a crucified man. The Shroud of Turin isn't just a relic, it's a mirror held up to faith and reason, reflecting back questions that still defy answers. To the naked eye, it's a negative image, a shadowy figure with wounds matching the gospel accounts of Christ's passion, from the lacerations of a Roman whip to the puncture mark of a spear in his side. But the moment you shine a light through it, the image transforms. Photographer Secondo Pia discovered this in 1898 when his glass plate negatives revealed something astonishing. The faint markings on the cloth resolved into a detailed, lifelike positive image, a face, serene yet bearing the unmistakable marks of trauma. Forensic science has scrutinized the shroud like no other religious artifact. Bloodstains, analyzed in the 1970s, were found to contain hemoglobin and traces of bilirubin, consistent with severe physical torture. Pollen grains embedded in the fibers match species native to Jerusalem, including the thorny burnet plant used in Roman-era crowns. Even more perplexing, the image itself isn't painted. No brushstrokes or pigments exist. Instead, the fibers are chemically altered only on their uppermost microfibers, as if by a brief, intense burst of radiation. Researchers at Italy's National Agency for New Technologies have replicated similar markings using ultraviolet lasers, but nothing in the 14th century. The shroud's first documented appearance could have produced such an effect. Yet the carbon dating controversy still casts a long shadow. In 1988, 3 independent labs dated a sample to between 1260 and 1390, seemingly debunking its authenticity. But critics quickly surfaced flaws. The tested sample came from a medieval repair patch, not the original cloth. Later studies noted the shroud's unique weave matches 1st century Syrian textiles, not European linens. Even the burn marks from a 1532 fire, which left symmetrical patterns, suggest the image predates the damage, an impossibility if it were a medieval forgery. Devotion to the shroud transcends these debates. When it was last displayed in 2015, over 2 million pilgrims filed past it, many weeping or praying as if in the presence of something beyond explanation. John Paul II called it an icon of suffering, while atheist historian Thomas de Wesselo argues in his book The Sign that the shroud's image projected in a darkened room could explain the resurrection appearances that birthed Christianity. Perhaps the most haunting detail comes from an unexpected source: NASA scientists. In the 1970s, their VP-8 image analyzer, designed to map planetary surfaces, processed the shroud's data and produced a 3-dimensional relief, something impossible with any known painting technique. The image, it seemed, encoded spatial information like a photographic negative, with lighter and darker areas corresponding to the distance between cloth and body. The shroud refuses to fit neatly into either faith or skepticism. It's a medieval fake with 1st century pollen, a burial cloth that behaves like a photographic plate. A relic venerated for centuries, yet still daring us to ask, what if the most important image in human history wasn't made by human hands? From the storm-shattered ships of the Spanish Armada to the dancing sun over Fatima, from the inexplicable endurance of Lanciano's Eucharistic flesh to the silent weeping of a wooden statue in Akita, what binds these stories across centuries and continents isn't just their defiance of natural law, but something far more profound: humanity's unshakable longing to believe we're not alone in the universe. Each of these moments, whether etched in sacred texts or whispered in soldiers' diaries, crackles with the same electric question: what if the boundary between the ordinary and the miraculous is thinner than we dare to admit? Consider the patterns that emerge when we step back. Divine intervention rarely arrives as we expect. It flickers at the edges of desperation: a paralyzed man lowered through a roof, a widow burying her only son, a peasant girl hearing voices in a war-torn field. It speaks in the language of the overlooked: shepherds, soldiers, the sick, and the sidelined. And perhaps most strikingly, it leaves just enough room for doubt that faith must leap the gap. The Red Sea's parting winds could be meteorological. The Virgin of Guadalupe's tilma might be an artistic marvel, but isn't that the point? These stories don't bully us into belief, they beckon us to wonder. Cultures spin these encounters into different shapes, yet the core remains startlingly universal. The Hindu Saint Ramakrishna seeing the Divine Mother blaze from the Ganges isn't so far from Moses' burning bush. The Buddhist monks of Tibet who recount levitating statues share the same awe as Catholics venerating the liquefying blood of Saint Januarius. Even secular experiences, those moments of improbable coincidence we call fate or luck, hint at a deeper grammar of meaning woven into existence. So where does that leave us? You don't have to embrace every miracle as literal truth to feel their collective weight. Maybe they're psychological lifelines, stories we've crafted to endure life's harshest winters. Or maybe, just maybe, they're glimpses of a reality too vast for our textbooks to contain. Either way, their power endures because they tap into our deepest fears and fiercest hopes, that no darkness is absolute, no suffering meaningless, and no cry goes unheard. Now it's your turn. Have you ever stood at the edge of the inexplicable, felt the brush of something beyond the material world? The comments below are open, not for debate, but for the quiet sharing of stories that don't fit neatly into logic. And if these historical mysteries have left you hungry for more, don't forget to explore our deep dives into lost civilizations, unsolved artifacts, and the strange intersections of faith and science. Because history isn't just about what we can prove, it's about what we dare to imagine. Who knows, the next great mystery might be waiting for you to uncover it.